Ellis. I'm the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Charter School Capital, and I'm here today with Sandro Lanni, the CEO of Charter School Management Corporation, and we are excited to be with you today to talk to you about building growth strategies for charter schools. Without further ado, we'll get rolling. As we go through things today, did want to let you know that don't worry about taking screenshots or anything of the material. We actually do have copies available for download, and as you get to the end of the materials today, you can link to it and download it to share with your colleagues and friends to the extent that's valuable. So with that, Sandro, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. It's my honor and privilege to have you as a partner out there in the charter school world. I think it'd be helpful for everybody, for those across the country who don't know your background. Could you provide a little background on the company and why people should be so impressed with your expertise?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Good morning. This is Sandro Lanni with Charter School Management Corporation. Yeah, CSMC was founded about 16 years ago. I was a charter school founder as a parent, as a labor of love. Started a charter school in California in the late 90s. Served on its board as treasurer, and quite by accident ended up starting a back office business services business to fill a need that I saw in our own school, and that translated now into serving about 200 charter schools in 11 states nationwide, doing everything from business services to student data to compliance reporting, just about everything that's non-education program related for a charter school. We do that heavy lift for our client base.
Well, Sandro's organization and ours have worked together on many mutual clients and projects across the country over the years. Charter School Capital formed in 2006, funded our first school in 2007, and today we've invested over $1 billion in charter schools across the country, serving more than 500 schools and in excess of 500,000 students, and it's a privilege to be able to do that. Today, Sandro and I are going to share some of our experience with the clients that we have across the country or over the years, given the different strategies that charter schools can engage in depending on your stage in the growth cycle. So we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk through different challenges that you may face as school leaders and operators, depending on what stage you're at. And then Sandra will be sharing a number of best practices that I think we've all seen across all the various schools and different states we've operated in. As I mentioned earlier, the presentation is available for download, and you can get it at slideshare.net/Charter School Capital, and both Sandro's and my contact information are at the end to the extent you want to reach out to us or our organizations after the webinar today. So how do we think about stages of growth or charter school life cycle? We've simplified the various stages of charter school life cycle into these three phases. The startup phase, which is really, as we think about it, years kind of 0 pre-opening to maybe year 2 or 3, where schools will have a relatively small percentage of the students they will eventually serve. It's important to note that the bulk of schools that end up not making it long term actually fail during this startup phase, during the first couple of years. if you make it past that like an infant in the world, you can live often a relatively long and healthy life, but and your organization or institution can. But that's a particularly challenging period. The second phase, which we have commonly referred to as the growth phase or high growth phase, is a little bit like being an adolescent, where your organization looks very different at the end of that period than it does at the beginning. There are very rapid changes like a teenager. And what's really important there is now beyond survival. It's about being flexible and creating stability in your organization. But as you see on the bottom of this chart, the organizations could grow, will often triple or more during just a 2 to 3 year period or 3 to 4 year period during this high growth phase. And then finally, a period that we refer to as sustainable maturity is when you get past that and you get out to the point where you have about the student count that you would expect at kind of full capacity and rolling along. There are different strategies to engage in there. It's not like the charter school or education game is over. You're now in a place where you can really focus on delivering the very best academic performance or replicating your model and opening other schools. And those are strategic choices that schools can make along the way. Very different challenges at each phase and very different strategies to engage in to address things as you go. A number of studies been done, but we found this to be most useful, that the Center for Education Reform, and this is now about 4 or 5 years ago, the study was completed where the reasons for charter school closure was broken down. And it's a common misconception that most charter schools close due to academic reasons. About 1 in 5 schools close due to academic reasons, but 2/3 of the schools close due to financial constraints or mismanagement, which frankly I view as also financial constraints, though you fail due to insufficient funds coming in, and sometimes that is related to miscalculations on management's part as opposed to just structure that doesn't work financially. But this breakdown of the reasons for school closure is here. Again, it's important to know that of the schools that close across the country, 87% of schools that do close in their first 3 years of operations.
Stuart, this is Sandro. I'll just chime in there. In our anecdotal practical experience, we've seen this play out in terms of our experience with charter schools. More than 2/3 of the time they're closing, actually 3/4 of the time they're closing either because of a financial issue or a combination of that and a mismanagement or a misstep somewhere that essentially shut down the school in the first few years. Our experience mirrors this data very closely.
Thanks. So as we walk through things, we've tried to simplify some of the strategies, at least in a way to frame everything. And across the top of this chart, which we're going to fill in for you, the 3 phases are listed: startup, growth, sustainability. And then down the left side, the different strategies or that will be filled in against 5 core kind of subject areas or areas of focus. The first is financing. Strategies do vary across these stages. Second, what am I going to do with, or how do I address facilities needs? Finally, what kind of structure of operational support works for your organization? At a high level, I'm going to walk through and fill these in, and Sandro will, as we go through, be providing I think some specific insights examples as we go through things. But During the startup phase, the focus, as we mentioned earlier, is on really just surviving the first few years. And maybe that seems like a low bar, but it's a pretty significant challenge. And there, on the financing front, although everybody always talks about cost of financing, during the startup phase, it's really about getting any capital you can get your hands on. Any form of liquidity, any donations, any loans or financing forms, anybody who will invest in your organization, you want to take as much cash as you can. It will allow you to survive that period, and in the end, you know, an extra dollar of financing cost is relatively insignificant in the life of your organization. But missing payroll or not being able to pay your bills overall during that early phase can be devastating and actually destroy your organization. Similarly, on facilities, it's not really about having the Taj Mahal of schools early on, or even having a perfect facility for your academic program. Instead, it's about just having the location, you know, where you want to be long term. That way, you don't have to move out of the area and have parents and kids and families transitioning to another location where you might lose kids over time, but just making sure you have some facility in the target locale. From a community involvement standpoint, it's about generating awareness. People don't know you exist, just let them know you do. Academically, you have to get going and just establish the program. They haven't scored your system or ranked you against the other state schools because you're just getting started. And finally, anyway. And frankly, you can leverage a lot of expertise from organizations like Charter School Management Corporation at CSMC and Sandro's organization to advise you on things that you might not otherwise be aware of. During the growth phase, as opposed to frame and being with an organization that can support you early and then still handle the financing of your organization a couple years later when you're 3 or 4 times the size is very valuable. Otherwise, you have to be switching partners all the time and invest heavily in management time to take care of those things. Similarly, on the facilities front, flexibility is the theme, where maybe you have enough land to cover your eventual mature organization, but having empty buildings can be an expensive weight to carry that you're paying rent for or that you'll be financing in a loan. So having modular or temporary facilities you can expand into to get initial student count up can be very helpful and low cost, again, in the local target location. Community involvement, people start wondering if this fantastic idea of a charter school locally, you know, you have to now begin to fulfill the promise. And academically, your program begins to get measured, and you need to perform against that to ensure that authorizers and families in the area will continue to come and join and support your institution. And finally, you can begin to have some transitional resources where you're going from outside experts to having more and more people in-house full-time, if that makes sense, where you can still get the expertise at reasonable cost. As you move out longer term to maturity and sustainability, then financing is all about cost. By that time, you know, when you're in years 5, say that in earlier stages you don't care about cost. It's just that it's secondary to having the liquidity, and other things are more valuable, like management time. But here, when you get out, you have a lot of options. You can compete people off each other and, frankly, get the best-in-class cost all the way along. Facilities, now you can invest in curb appeal or reduce the cost of your facilities from a community involvement standpoint, you really want to become part of the fabric of the neighborhood, community, or city that you serve. Because at that point, to the extent you can invest in that, people will never allow an authorizer to shut you down if you're delivering something of real value to the community. Academically, it's all about continuous improvement, and from an rely on outside experts for certain functions that are just much better delivered at scale by some outside organization. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and ask Sandro, before we drop into the 3 phases in detail, anything you'd say overall here on strategic approaches?
Yeah, what you've done is you've highlighted the, I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule, but there's definitely a set of stages most organizations are going through that you've captured very well in terms of the startup to growth and the sustainability. And there's certain common patterns that go with all of them in terms of how the organization charter school evolved over time. And those are
yeah. So one final note on finance, just because it's one of the core things that we do, is there are a lot of ways to think about them. For working capital or operating funding, the actual structure is not necessarily critical. It's just about getting the funds, but there are a lot of options out there in terms of term loans, receivable sales, lines of credit, and doing that cost effectively. On the facilities side, similarly, lease options are available, bond transactions for some of the more mature organizations, charter schools in the country have actually been able to receive bond financing, and there are certainly constraints associated with that. And then traditional bank lending comes and goes also. And the final point we'd make on this is evaluating from a cost of funds standpoint. Somebody once said, all costs are not created equal. It's not really about the percentage rate that you see advertised. It's about the dollars you're spending on the financing. That's what you pay for teachers with, is dollars, not percentages. And there are often small print on transactions like the bond market or others, where there can be very heavy transactional costs or penalties that people need to be aware of, along with the management time dedicated to raising money. So that can be a huge distraction and a cost to your organization that people don't necessarily think about as much as they might. So with that, I want to transition to Sandro to talk about the startup phase specifically. And with that, Sandro, why don't you walk us through your thoughts on the startup phase?
Thank you, Stuart. So the startup phase is kind of what I like to call, in some ways, the honeymoon phase. When you're first starting a charter school, in most cases, the founders of the charter school have been through a long, hard road, and it seems like an almost unfathomable amount of work to get from essentially the concept or the thought of a school to the point where you actually have an approved charter. And that original group of individuals will have put in an immense amount of work. And my conversation with them often is, as hard as you think you've worked, now the real work begins. So the startup phase is a time of hard work. There's a lot of elation and kind of the realization of a dream coming true. And then a different phase now in terms of getting the school off the ground begins. Many sins are forgiven in the first year or two in terms of the stakeholders, the parents, even the authorizers. Sometimes I call it the honeymoon phase. Not all things are forgiven, but some things are. And the real work of putting the school together starts here, even though it seemed like all this hard work has happened just with getting the charter school off the ground. In terms of common misperceptions, what people think is going to happen and does or doesn't happen, you know, founders, just like a lot of entrepreneurs, are not always the best natural business operators. And in essence, you're starting a business when you're opening a charter school. You're starting both an educational institution and a business. And there's a transition that has to go from a startup mindset to I have to create something to now I have to operate it and grow it and nurture it. And that entrepreneurial spirit has to give way to an operational mindset. A big variable is, you know, not all the kids you think are going to show up necessarily show up, and that can be a real challenge for people in terms of enrollment. The "you build it, they will come" is a very common mindset, and it makes sense, because if you didn't believe that, you probably wouldn't have put in all the work to start the charter school in the first place. Sometimes it can take years from the time you conceive a charter to the time you actually get the charter approved and end up in a facility or location. And so you have to keep in mind the competitive landscape in terms of who else is also vying for that same student population now versus what you thought was available when you first started the process. Money is virtually always a problem. It doesn't show up when you think it's going to show up. It's never enough. You can never completely anticipate how much you will need. And a lot of people, unfortunately, have kind of a thinking that, well, now I have a charter, the money just comes. And unfortunately, it usually never does. And it always shows up, you know, at a time much later than when you actually need it, because at the beginning you need a lot more of it and you need it early on. The other thing is you have to remember that not everybody shares the same vision as you in terms of people in the community. Other outside agencies are not rooting for you to succeed, and sometimes that is the shock to the system, because your intentions are all good and positive, but other people are not necessarily rooting for you to succeed. So you're going to be fighting some of those battles as well, and that sometimes comes as a surprise to a startup charter school founding team.
That last point about everybody will be rooting for us is a really good point. The look of surprise on leaders' faces when the teachers' unions are fighting against you, or your local school district that was supposed to be your authorizer doesn't seem to be helping, always seems to be a surprise as charters are challenged by things from all sides.
Thank you, Stuart. On the challenges side, I can't stress enough how finding good leadership and teachers makes or breaks you at the beginning. So when we talk about why schools fail at the beginning, obviously finances is a big one. The other one is just general mismanagement, and that takes the place of that has a face of either a poor instructional leader, either a principal or executive director that is not fit for the task, teachers that are not aligned to the mission and the vision of the charter, and aren't either the right fit or are not supported appropriately, and a supportive board. So boards can take run the gamut of being overly involved to completely disconnected. The best kind of board is a supportive board that is keeping the eye on the ball in terms of the focus and mission of the vision of the charter. The other real problems, challenges that we see commonly in this startup phase is low enrollment, again, if you don't get the student count that you need, it creates an entire massive amount of problems that roll into each other that are tied to lack of money, budget flexibility, and it's also a morale killer. And then the other issue that will drag down a charter school faster than anything else is the facility issue. So either you can't get the location you want, the location is too expensive, it doesn't match up with what parents expect, you get it too late, it costs you so much money that it's a fiscal drag on your operations for years to come. I will tell you long term that the wrong location or the inappropriate location or a location, a facility that is selected too late in the process is something that will drag down the charter school for years to come. And it's a big thing. When I first talk to new charter operators who have just been chartered, I tell them the next three things they have to worry about is facilities, 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 because without that being settled in, nothing else really falls into place. It's hard to get people excited about enrolling their kid if they don't know where the school is going to be or if it's in a location they don't like. So the facilities is a huge piece early on that has to be addressed.
Should we talk about best practices?
Let's do that. So in terms of things that are working well for operators that I've seen have some excellent successes, they're reaching out to other schools. And they don't necessarily have to be schools right in the neighborhood. It can be other charter operators across the state. There's a lot of good examples of people that have been through it. And generally the charter community is pretty engaging, pretty open. Most people don't huddle around and keep things as a closely guarded secret. Most charter operators are willing to share the things that have worked and haven't worked with them. If you're new to the charter landscape, try and find a mentor either through the charter association or through some regional meetings so that they can help you avoid some common pitfalls and help guide you into some best practices. What we also find with really solid operators is they're very diligent about keeping an eye on budget discipline. They've spent a lot of time really looking at creating and developing a budget very deliberately with all their stakeholders. And if they have outside consulting groups or a back office provider, they've taken the time to really understand their budget in detail. And then they're reevaluating where they're at with their budget throughout the year. Because again, if you start to run into budget discipline problems, cash flow problems, anything of a financial nature, it impacts the entire program. And then they're also evaluating and monitoring the actual student achievement. How are they doing in terms of implementing the program? In the first few years, you always have to assume that the patient is kind of in an ICU, that the patient is always critical and needs constant monitoring, because the margin for error is smallest at the beginning. Your enrollment is usually just nascent and growing. You're still getting your feet wet with how the program is going to be implemented, how the money's coming in, how it's being spent. So you really have to keep a close eye on everything. You will ask a lot of your stakeholders, which includes your board, your staff, your parents, and you want to build honest, open, transparent relationships with them. You want to communicate real problems and challenges because you're going to ask them to help you with them, and they're going to be more willing to engage and assist you and give you the benefit of the doubt if you're being more open and transparent about your needs and your challenges.
As we go through this, one of the things that I think is a useful reminder, though, and may not result in anything specific, is the last point on here about not wavering in your belief or mission. Given the challenges of the early stages of any charter school organization, you face a lot of unexpected things, a lot of bumps in the road and hardships that you might not have anticipated. And one of the biggest things about getting to the next phase and having your organization survive and thrive to serve students and families as you intended is that commitment to whatever the mission was and belief when you got into it in the first place. It's always harder than you expect, but now you're in it. And staying committed to your original mission and not varying or wavering from that is really important to remember, since it's usually the thing that carries your organization through those early difficult times. So we've survived the startup phase, or you have. Let's talk a little bit about growth.
Thank you, Stuart. So, yeah, so some common misperceptions of growth. Well, first, what are we really calling this stage? So this is typically in your kind of in the third to fifth year. So the first 2 years is the creation and kind of getting your feet wet, and it's a startup mode. Now you're into the growth mode. You're into your third year, fourth, fifth year, so to speak. You're adapting to any different or changing educational standards landscape. If you're in California, that this is a constantly evolving thing that you have to adapt to. Are we in Common Core? Are we changing the STAR test? Students, more parents, more stakeholders, more staff, and that creates its own strain on the school to sustain that and continue to grow the organization. So some of the common misperceptions that schools face during this phase is, after the second or third year, it's all going to be smooth sailing. Well, that I've never seen that happen. There's always new challenges, new things that happen, and there's always things that were not handled at the beginning startup phases that into the growth phase that you're going to still have to be dealing with. Your performance targets, accountability requirements will still be there, and you still have to hit them even as you're trying to grow the organization. And in some cases, they become even more challenging as you scale. You never get to do the professional development that you always thought you were going to do. The amount of time, cost, and human capital available to do that is never what you thought it was going to be. You need to have routines and systems in place, and they need to be able to change. A lot of people think, well, I've set these systems in place, everything is fine, and all the processes are set. That usually does not last. They will have to be adapted, and they will have to change. You still don't have the money you think you're going to have, even though you've become great at watching your budget and keeping an eye on spending and understanding the ebb and flow of the timing of cash coming in. It still doesn't settle in. And as you grow, actually, the challenges of cash flow management become significant because of the way the state funds growth. And then your facility needs and changes in terms of how your location and buildings and structures work with the growth do not always pan out the way you thought they were going to do. And sometimes the growth pattern that you anticipated doesn't line up with what's actually happening. So you may be in a facility that's too big or too small or can't accommodate it, or the parking situation isn't the same, or the way the pickup and drop off is working is overwhelming you. So there's a lot of things you cannot anticipate until you're actually there, and you must adapt the flexibility to deal with those things so you can move and essentially pivot the organization effectively.
One of the things that Sandro, you mentioned earlier is the idea of, at an early stage, getting or finding mentors and connecting with the networks out there. And I think during the startup and growth phase, being able to take advantage of people all across the country who have expertise, best practices, et cetera, and are willing to share them is useful. And doing that through an organization like yours and ours is another way to do so. And across our two organizations, we probably have 1,000 schools of network across the country, and the various authorizers and associations. As you're a school or school leaders during these two stages, the startup and high growth phase, being able to participate with organizations like ours or others who are happy to share expertise, network, and relationships that can be helpful, can be very useful as you face some of the challenges you see on page 19.
Yes, and so those challenges, this is just a small list, but I'll give you some examples. So you're going to have to adjust to higher expectations from either the state or your sponsor in terms of your accountability. So that the bar will always go up over time. So if you had initial success, your sponsor will expect that success to continue and to continue to improve. And that is coupled with the challenges of just scaling an organization. So it's a twofold exercise in terms of a challenge. You are going to face greater demands for services. As you add more students, you're going to have a greater variety of need from staff and from students of different components that you're going to have to address. You're going to have to deal with teachers and leaders coming and going. And so some of those will be good teachers and leaders, and some will be ineffective teachers and leaders. But nevertheless, there will be change and there will be turnover. And as you grow, there will be more of it, just as a consequence of having more human capital to manage. You will be dealing with the lack of capital for furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. You want a computer lab, or you want more furniture, or you want more, special smart boards. You're going to have to go find those dollars, and the scale of those dollars will get larger over time. And then again, you will continue to have challenges with professional development and with identifying and implementing where you need that professional development relative to what you thought it would be when you first started the charter and startup phase. So when you're dealing with some of these challenges, what can you do to meet those? You want to build longer term expectations for continuous growth. So you want to have a short-term strategy with your stakeholders and your board, but you need to have a long-term strategic plan, and you have to constantly be revisiting that strategic plan as the actual reality sets in terms of your actual enrollment and your actual challenges and your actual staff capacity to meet those challenges. You want to basically be prepared to access resources and expanding the learning environment via technology. That's becoming more and more prevalent, not only in terms of stakeholder expectations, but the way the testing is rolled out, the way authorizers and state expectations are. The integration of technology is almost becoming mandatory. You have to have a plan for that, how it's integrated with your professional development, in your finance, in terms of your budget, and in terms of your strategic plan. And you want to create capacity building in terms of your human capital so that you have succession plans in terms of key staff coming and going, teachers being able to move up in terms of their ability to mentor other teachers, and in terms of an entire staff capacity to build that human capital leadership. And then you want to continuously improve and evaluate your assessment systems. How is it lining up with telling you where your students are aligned with the charter vision and with the state standards that you're trying to meet? So the list is endless here, but you have to, as a charter school operator, make sure that your parents, your employees, and your board all have short, medium, and long-term visions to address these ever-evolving challenges that you're going to face as you grow and you scale the organization. Meanwhile, you're still trying to run and operate your school at the same time, but you have to keep your eye on the overall big picture, or you'll be constantly in firefighting mode because you're not addressing longer-term issues.
That's really valuable insight.
Thank you.
I'm
sorry. Go ahead, Stuart.
Oh, I was going to transition to some of the work we did that we discussed previously on quantifying the impact of growth. Anything else you wanted to add on the best practices? I think your point about maintaining that strategic vision all the way through and balancing that with the operational needs is really critical.
Yeah, it is, and it's hard work, and a lot of themselves in the long run because they avoid a lot of pitfalls that end up getting others in trouble because they just didn't take the time or couldn't take the time to address them earlier on.
Well, with the challenges of growing and expanding, and with the things that Sandro's mentioned about the constraints monetarily and from a capital standpoint, one of the things people might ask is, well, I think I'll just keep everything small. You know, you avoid a number of problems doing that, a number of challenges by maintaining a relatively small institution. However, one of the things that charter leaders sometimes miss out on is the actual financial impact or value of growth. Obviously, you know, people in their heads always say, sure, you know, scale can add some efficiency, but we've gone about across the more than 500 schools we've supported and across the country and looking at very different structures of schools, from site-based schools, online schools, blended learning models, specialty institutions. We've looked at what is the impact or what can the impact be of growth to an organization. And this chart that we're looking at on page 21 has a number of concepts in it as a tool that we've created that charter leaders and boards can use to think about the question of should we grow, and if so, how much, and what's the financial impact of that. So on the upper left quadrant is some basic information about this example charter school, aptly named Very Cool Charter School. The example here is a site-based organization with enrollment just shy of 400, and with room in the facility to go to nearly 600. There's some information here that are assumptions one needs to make, which is, hey, if I want to grow, I probably have to do some marketing or invest some recruiting. And the averages we've seen across the country of an efficient marketing program still means you generally have to invest $700 per student to increase enrollment just to get them in the door. That doesn't include the costs of additional facilities or furniture, fixture, technologies, what have you. Those are built into the assumptions in the lower left-hand quadrant, which is an evaluation that shows if I were to grow Very Cool Charter School and we were to expand from the approximately 400 students they had at the beginning to as many as 600, which is more than the facility might hold as it's currently configured, what's the financial impact? And what you begin to see here is the impact of things like your fixed cost structure, whether it's certain administrative functions or the facilities themselves or other things where the costs tend to be spread as you add more and more students. There are other costs like teacher count and some of the individual technology pieces that are more variable and they increase with the each student you add. But if you look down here, what you see is the investment required to expand is now down below, and the two lines that say growth capital required and discretionary surplus is the outcome associated with that investment. So if this school grew 10% or added another 40 students, it would cost $171,000 of investment up front for the school to be able to do that. However, on an annual basis, it would generate just over $210,000 of incremental profit or surplus to the organization. And that's every year that would be generated by this process. So when somebody asks a question like, well, if I'm going to do that and I have to finance the $171,000 of growth capital, you know, if I have to spend on financing costs, that'll reduce that. Yes, but so long as you're spending less than $200,000 a year to get that 10% increase, it's actually financially worth it, which often comes as a surprise to most people. If you extended that out and you grew things 25%, you can see that the growth capital required is $560,000, but then the organization generates nearly $400,000 a year in incremental surplus. And again, what we're calling discretionary surplus, the reason we're calling it that is you get this incremental profit to your organization, although you may be a nonprofit, and that can be reinvested in academic programs or facilities or other community investments or institutional investment that you want to make that can really help your organization get better and better and improve over time and deliver more value back to the students and families you serve. On the upper right-hand quadrant, you see this picture, which is the golden line is this revenue and the blue line being expenses. And you can see at 400 kids, the organization is operating at or near break even. But as it moves out further and further right, as you add more and more attendance on the horizontal axis, you can see annual revenues increase at a faster pace than how much can be funded. And what you see is if you added 50%, one of the reasons the growth capital is so much higher for 50% over 25% growth is you go beyond the existing facility, so you have to invest to create room for 25 or 30 more seats or 30 more seats. And as you do that, that will take significant or greater incremental growth capital, which is why things jump to $1.3 million. However, you do get $650,000 a year in incremental profit. And in the lower right-hand corner, we quantified what the impact of these various growth strategies are, or the financial impact. And what you see is over a 5 to 10 year period, the 50% growth strategy, if you can accomplish it, generates $3.8 million over 5 years, or $7.8 million to your organization over 10 years. Even 10% growth net of cost of financing still generates nearly $1.2 million over 5 years, or $2.4 million over 10 years. And you get the idea of the impact of these things. And these kind of tools are things that CSMC or charter school capital can help evaluate for your organization and your leadership team as you go through this. Before we move on to sustainable maturity, Sandro, comments on the kind of financial analysis associated with growth, or the impact of any of these growth strategies on the finances of the organization?
Yeah, so a lot of people always ask us, you know, what's the right size, or what's the sweet spot, or what's the, you know, how many kids should I have? And we can certainly, both charter school capital and organizations like CSMC can always model that for you, and take a look at your specific operation based on your facilities cost, your location, your salary structure, and come up with and model that. I will say that in almost all cases, the more students, the more growth you have to a point, allows you to have more flexibility in terms of running the program effectively, and contributes almost always positively to the bottom line. So if you're running a generally sound operation more students will equate to variable revenue over variable cost, and that the difference between that revenue line and that expense line will continue to increase in a positive way, and then it starts to really put a lot of money to the bottom line, and those investments in growth almost always pay off in terms of long-term fund balance accumulation, and having that money and that capital over time gives you a great deal of flexibility in terms of adding schools, growing your schools, adding programs, changing your physical location, adding on to your building. For lack of a better term, money is power and control, and a great way to get there is having a growth pattern, and investing in that early on can pay off large dividends in the long run.
We've had a number of questions as we've been going through this, the webinar today, and we've been trying to answer them as we go, but I'll call out a couple. One is question on this page is people have asked about discretionary surplus. Does that mean the net? And that is, yes, indeed, it's the net leftover extra cash and income to the organization after paying the extra facilities, staff, and supply costs. So this is quite literally the extra profitability or surplus above and beyond serving that new student community that's available to the organization. Now, if it was a for-profit company, owners of this organization might say, oh, I can just keep that. But whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, what it really does is, to Sandro's point, it creates additional resources that can be reinvested in the organization to continue to support either additional growth or to just make the programs better and more sustainable over time. Another question from one of the people listening in today, and regarding specific enrollment numbers or targets for each of the stages that we're referring to. And here, I guess what I'd say is there's no specific target or enrollment number or hard numbers per se for each stage. It really, these stages, startup growth and maturity, which we're about to transition to, is really more about the percentage on your way to your long-term target size or a sustainable, mature organization. And if your overall goal is to serve 200 students in the long run, then maybe early on you'll open your doors with 50 or a smaller amount. You'll still have that high growth transition period once you get established. And so the change from 50 to 200 is really pretty rapid, just as it is from 200 to 1,000. And it is that order of magnitude shift that makes each of these stages so challenging. It's not necessarily harder to run an organization with 500 when you open than it is with 50, but that growth in the middle, when you go from 500 to 2,000 or 50 to 200, feels just as shocking to your organization. And so that's more of what the stages define rather than an individual target amount. And for each location or specific strategy of a charter school and the neighborhood or community you serve, there will be different appropriate sizes for your organization, and you'll really be the best at assessing that, depending on whether you're in Madison County, Louisiana, or whether you're in the middle of New York City. So with that, Sandra, we have another 5 to 10 minutes to finish things off today. Let's go through the comments on the sustainable maturity phase and see if there's any thoughts we can leave people with today.
Great, thank you, thank you. So some of the common misperceptions once you get to that sustainable maturity. So now you've hit 800 students, and that was your ultimate kind of growth plan, and you're kind of at a steady state now. You've got a consistent batch of students coming in and matriculating out, and you're in that steady course phase. First of all, you'll be shocked to know that not everybody believes you are an unstoppable force, and again, plenty of people out to get you, and there's even a bigger target on your head once you're established and you're kind of a steady player. There's always somebody out there who's going to try and take you down because you've got more than likely a bunch of students they'd either rather have or don't want you to have. In terms of kind of cashing in, it's not easy. First of all, in most cases, you're running a not-for-profit, so there is no cashing out as if you started a for-profit business. Really, what you're doing is you're just trying to maximize utilization of the resources you do have for the long term. And you're more than likely, if you take a look at where you're at operationally, you're running a completely different kind of school than you were when you first started up. And sometimes you don't even see it. It just happens and evolves over time, as it should. But if you just stop and you look at where you're at in the maturity phase and how you do things day to day, and you compare it to what it was like at the beginning, it's like two completely different charter schools. That sometimes is a shock to the system when people stop and take a look at that. Just like any other business, if you've gotten to the maturity stage and you are successful, you look very different than when you first started.
I think the biggest, Sandra, one thing to interject here is, sure. I think the biggest thing is that there's a perception for those who are in the earlier stages of startup or growth that once I get there, wherever there is, we'll just be able to coast. Like all these challenges will go away. In fact, it doesn't get any easier. It just changes what you're dealing with, what the challenges are. It's just different. And our collective experience is those who get there and begin to coast tend to coast in a steady decline rather than continue to remain and improve and continue to thrive.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue to the next slide, which is the challenges slide. So it's hard to keep being fresh and innovative, but you actually have to stay true to your mission, but you have to keep it fresh. You can't get stale because you will then just do a slow, steady decline. Your organizational structure and human capital management actually become huge. So what ends up becoming really critical is how do you handle this larger scale and this maturity in terms of your leadership structure, your teacher structure, how you promote, retain, and train your staff becomes a really big deal. It becomes too big, typically, for you to be the hero and to pick up the pieces like you did when you were in startup mode or even to some degree growth mode. The organization is too big and too established for somebody to sit there and try and fill all the gaps and put on the firefighting mode. You have to be doing it now as a sustainable, process-built organization. And you have to continuously adjust this established, mature organization to changing market conditions, the expectations of the community about what you're delivering, what stakeholders expect, what your authorizer expects, what the state standards expect, change. And you have to now move this larger monolithic structure that's not a startup or a growth phase anymore to meet those conditions, or else again you will face a slow, steady decline otherwise.
Final thoughts on best practices? Any of the things we haven't mentioned that are here that we need to point out as we...
Yeah, the other thing that is really always in the mix that you always have to keep in mind is you always have to have a bead on the politics of your situation. And these all, as they say, all politics are local. And for charter schools, it means that more than anything. The politics of the situation will evolve oftentimes beyond your control. Do you have a friendly authorizer board? Is the local community positive or negative or neutral about you in your school? That changes over time. Some of those things you can control and some of those things you cannot. But either way, you are still beholden to the reality of the political situation, and you must deal with it and adapt to it throughout the life cycle of your charter school.
Thanks. Another question that popped up very specifically, I'll touch on here, and then we'll transition to close things out today, is somebody asked about our $700 per student recruiting cost. And there, that is what we've seen as a national average for programs for successful organizations. And while it may seem higher than you might expect, a lot of the marketing around enrollment involves either people, management, time, teams, but it is the incremental cost of getting a student in the door and increasing your average enrollment. So that may be that you got more kids than that, but it's really about the revenue. And for those who think that might be, that might sound like a lot, in the scheme of things, it's not actually that much. If you think about it, the average nationally and locally, things may vary quite a bit. The national average for charter schools is just over $8,000 per student for annual revenue. So investing 10% or less to get an incremental student can be very valuable to your organization, particularly given that most students don't come just for 1 year. They'll be there over time and can bring in sustainable income and revenue to your organization above and beyond the cost of incremental students, incremental teachers, facilities, technology, et cetera. So with that, and by the way, on all of these things, Sandro and I and our teams are available to have follow-up conversations to the extent any of you want to. As noted, these stages that we've talked through, the varying strategies across each of these phases that you might experience, the specific examples that Sandro shared today, we're happy to discuss these things and be some of the experts that you can leverage out there, or introduce you to other members of our network to help make your schools as successful as they can be. With that, just a reminder, contact info here for our two organizations and for Sandro and for me. And for anybody who wants to download the presentation or printed materials that are here, there's the slideshare.net/charterschoolcapital. You can get it there. And I think it's also a link will be sent to everybody who registered today. There's also, frankly, the webinar is also available via recording if you want to hear the dulcet tones of Sandro's lulling and beautiful voice singing out all these brilliant insights. Sandro, anything else to add before we close out for the day?
Yeah, no, thank you, Stuart, for moderating the webinar, and I will also agree. Any follow-up questions, be happy to email Stuart or I directly, and we'll be happy to get you any information that you need as a follow-up.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a privilege to be on, and I actually really appreciated the insights that you had to share. Sandro, it's always fun to get out there and work together. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We enjoy it, and it's a privilege for Sandro and I to be out there serving charter schools across the country. And with that, we look forward to talking to you all again in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.